Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 4 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984. As always, we're going to look at the copyright information here. It says all rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions thereof in any form. And that's what I'm going by. If there are any copyright issues, I will take the video down. Also, I do want to say that the book does deal with stereotypes, violence, and some stuff that I don't really agree with, especially violence against certain racial groups. And I do want to say before I start reading this again that I don't approve of that. But that this is a very old book, but a very good book also, in that I believe that the stereotypes do serve a purpose, I suppose, even though I don't agree with them. With that being said, we are going to pick up where we left off, which I believe was right here. Winston was having a dream about his mother and sister and about how they sacrificed their lives to save his or something. We're going to see what's up with that. We just started chapter 3, so we're only a couple pages. Yeah, we're only one page into chapter 3. 2 pages, actually, if you count this one. Suddenly he was standing on short, springy turf on a summer evening when the slanting rays of the sun gilded the ground. The landscape that he was looking at recurred so often in his dream that he was never fully certain whether or not he had seen it in the real world. In his waking thought, he called it the Golden Country. It was an old rabbit-bitten pasture with a foot track wandering across it and a mole hole here and there in the ragged hedge on the opposite side of the field. The boughs of the elm trees were swaying very faintly in the breeze, their leaves just stirring in dense masses like a woman's hair. Somewhere near at hand, though, out of sight, there was a clear, slow-moving stream where dace were swimming in the pools under the willow trees. The girl with the dark hair was coming towards him across the field. With what seemed a single movement, she tore off her clothes and flung them indiscriminately aside. Her body was white and smooth, but it aroused no desire in him. Indeed, he barely looked at it. What overwhelmed him in that instant was admiration for the gestures with which she had thrown her clothing aside. With its grace and carelessness, it seemed to annihilate a whole culture, a whole system of thought, as though Big Brother and the party and the thought police could all be swept into nothingness by a single splendid movement of the arm. That too was a gesture belonging to an ancient time. Winston woke up with the word Shakespeare on his lips. The telescreen was giving forth an ear-splitting whistle, which continued on the same note for 30 seconds. It was not 7:50. It was not 7:15. Getting up time after. It was not UGHT. 7:15. Getting up time for office workers. Winston wrenched his body out of bed, naked, for a member of the other. For a member of the outer party receiving only 3,000 clothing coupons annually and a suit of pajamas was 600, and seized a dingy singlet and a pair of shorts that were lying across a chair. The physical jerks would begin in 3 minutes. The next moment he was doubled up by a violent coughing fit, which nearly always attacked him soon after waking up. It emptied his lungs so completely that he could only begin breathing again by lying on his back and taking a series of deep gasps. His veins had swelled with the effort of the cough, and the varicose ulcer had started itching. 30 to 40 group, yapped a piercing female voice. 30 to 40 group, take your places, please. 30s to 40s. Winston sprang to attention in front of the telescreen, upon which the image of a youngish woman, scrawny but muscular, dressed in tunic and gym shoes had already appeared. Arms bending and stretching, she rapped out. Take your time. By me. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Come on, comrades. Put a bit of life into it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pain of the coughing fit had not quite driven out of Winston's mind the impression made by his dream, and the rhythmic movements of the exercise restored it somewhat as he mechanically shot his arms back and forth, wearing on his face the look of grim enjoyment which was considered proper during the physical jerks. He was struggling to think his way backward into the dim period of his early childhood. It was extraordinarily difficult. Beyond the late 50s, everything faded. When there was no external records that you could refer to, even the outline of your own life lost its sharpness. You remembered huge events which had quite possibly not happened. You remembered the details of incidents without being able to recapture their atmosphere, and there were long blank periods to which you could assign nothing. Everything had been different then. Even the names of countries and their shapes on the maps had been different. Airstrip 1, for instance, had not been called in those days. It had been called England or Britain, though London, he felt fairly certain, had always been called London. Winston could not definitely remember a time when his country had not been at war, but it was evident that there had been a fairly long interval of peace during his childhood, because one of his early memories was of an air raid which appeared to take everyone by surprise. Perhaps it was the time when the atomic bomb had fallen on Colchester. He did not remember the raid itself, but he did remember his father's hand clutching his own as they hurried down into some place deep in the earth, round and round spiral staircase, which rang under his feet, and which finally so wearied his legs that he began whimpering, and they had to stop and rest. His mother, in her slow, dreamy way, had followed a long way behind them. She was carrying his baby sister, or perhaps it was only a bundle of blankets that she was carrying. He was not certain whether his sister had been born then. Finally, they had emerged into a noisy, crowded place, which he had realized to be a tube station. There were people sitting all over the stone-flagged floor, and other people packed tightly together were sitting on metal bunks, one above the other. Winston and his mother and father found themselves a place on the floor, and near them an old man and an old woman were sitting side by side on a bunk. The old man had on a decent dark suit and a black cloth cap pushed back from very white hair. His face was scarlet and his eyes were blue and full of tears. He reeked of gin. It seemed to breathe out of his skin in place of sweat, and one could have fancied that the others, welling from his eyes, were pure gin. But though slightly drunk, he was also suffering under some grief that was genuine and unbearable in his childish way. Winston grasped that some terrible thing, something that was beyond forgiveness and could never be remedied, had just happened. It also seemed to him that he knew what it was. Someone whom the old man loved, a little granddaughter perhaps, had been killed. Every few minutes, the old man kept repeating, "We didn't oughta have trusted him. I said so, Ma, didn't I? That's what come of trusting him. I said so all along. We didn't oughta to have trusted the buggers." But which buggers they didn't oughta have trusted, Winston could not now remember. Since about that time, war had been literally continuous. Though strictly speaking, it had not always been the same war. For several months during his childhood, there had been confused street fighting in London itself, some of which he remembered vividly, but to trace out the history of the whole period, to say who was fighting whom at any given moment would have been utterly impossible, since no written record and no spoken word ever made mention of any other alignment than the existing one. At that moment, for example, in 1984, if it was 1984, Oceania was at war with Eurasia and in alliance with East Asia. In no public or private utterance was it ever admitted that the three powers had at any time been grouped along different lines. Actually, Winston well knew it was only 4 years since Oceania had been at war with East Asia and in alliance with Eurasia. But that was merely a piece of furtive knowledge which he happened to possess because his memory was not satisfactorily under control. Officially, the change of partners had never happened. Oceania was at war with Eurasia, therefore Oceania had always been at war with Eurasia. The enemy of the moment always represented absolute evil, and it followed that any past or future agreement with him was impossible. The frightening thing, he reflected for the 10,000th time as he forced his shoulders painfully backwards, with hands on hips. They were gyrating their bodies from the waist, an exercise that was supposed to be good for back muscles. The frightening thing was that it might all be true if the party could thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event it never happened. That surely was more terrifying than mere torture and death. The party said that Oceania had never been in alliance with Eurasia. Winston Smith, knew that Oceania had been in alliance with Eurasia as short a time as 4 years ago. But where did that knowledge exist? Only in his own consciousness, which in any case must soon be annihilated. And if all others accepted the lie which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past ran the party slogan. Oh, wait. Controls the future. Okay, so he who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And yet the past, though of its nature alterable, never had been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was an unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it. In newspeak, doublethink. Stand easy, barked the instructress, a little more genially. Winston sank his arms to his sides and slowly refilled his lungs with air. His mind slid away into the labyrinthian world of doublethink. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies, to hold simultaneously two opinions which canceled out, knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it. We believe that democracy was impossible, and that the party was the guardian of democracy. To forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety. Consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. The instructress had called them to attention again. And now let's see which of us can touch our toes, she said enthusiastically. Right over from the hips, please. Comrades, 1, 2, 1, 2. Winston loathed this exercise, which sent shooting pains all the way from his heels to his buttocks, and often ended by bringing on another coughing fit. The half-pleasant quality went out of his meditations. The past, he reflected, had not merely been altered, it had been actually destroyed. For how could you establish even the most obvious facts when there existed no record outside your own memory? He tried to remember in what year he had first heard mention of Big Brother. He thought it must have been sometime in the 60s, but it was impossible to be certain. In the party histories, of course, Big Brother figured as the leader and guardian of the revolution since its very earliest days. His exploits had been gradually pushed backwards in time until already they extended into the fabulous world of the 40s and the 30s, when the capitalists in their strange cylindrical hats still rode through the streets of London in great gleaming motor cars or horse carriages with glass sides. There was no knowing how much of this legend was true and how much invented. Winston could not even remember at what date the party itself had come into existence. He did not believe he had ever heard the word Ingsoc before 1960, but it was possible that in this old speak form, English socialism, that is to say, it had been current earlier. Everything melted into mist. Sometimes, indeed, you could put your finger on a definite lie. It was not true, for example, as was claimed in the party history books, that the party had invented airplanes. He remembered airplanes since his earliest childhood, but you could prove nothing. There was never any evidence. Just once in his whole life, he had held in his hands unmistakable documented proof of the falsification of a historical fact. And on that occasion, Smith, screamed the shrewish voice over the telescreen. 6079, Smith W. Yes, you. Bend lower, please. You can do better than that. You're not trying. Lower, please. That's better, comrade. Now stand at ease, the whole squad, and watch me. A sudden hot sweat had broke out all over Winston's body. His face remained completely inscrutable. Never show dismay, never show resentment. A single flicker of the eyes could give you away. He stood watching while the instructress raised her arms above her head and, one could say not gracefully, but remarkably neatness and efficiency, bent over and tucked the first joint of her finger under her toes. There, comrades, that's how I want to see you doing it. Watch me again. I'm 39. I've had 4 children. Now look, she bent over again. You see, my knees aren't bent. You can all do it if you want to, she added. She added as she straightened herself up. Anyone under 45 is perfectly capable of touching his toes. We don't all have the privilege of fighting in the front lines, but at least we can all keep fit. Remember our boys on the Malabar front and the sailors in the floating fortress. Just think what they have to put up with. Now try again. That's better, comrade, much better, she added encouragingly as Winston, with a violent lunge, succeeded in touching his toes. with knees unbent for the first time in several years. We are to Chapter 4. With a deep, unconscious sigh, which not even the neatness of the telescreen could prevent him from uttering, when his day's work started, Winston pulled the speak right towards him, blew the dust from its mouthpiece, and put on his spectacles. Then he unrolled the clipped-together 4 small cylinders of paper which had already flopped out of the pneumatic tube on the right-hand side of the desk. In the walls of the cubicle there were 3 orifices. To the right of the speak right, a small pneumatic tube for written messages. To the left, a larger one for newspapers, and in the side wall, within easy reach of Winston's arm, a large oblong slit protected by a wire grating. This last was for disposing of waste paper. Similar slits existed in thousands or 10,000s throughout the building, not only in every room, but at short intervals in every corridor. For some reason, they were nicknamed memory holes. When one knew that any document was due for destruction, or even when one saw a scrap of waste paper lying about, it was an automatic action to lift the flap of the nearest memory hole and drop it in, whereupon it would be whirled away on a current of warm air to the enormous furnaces which were hidden somewhere in the recess of the building. Winston examined the 4 slips of paper which he had unrolled. Each contained a message of only 1 or 2 lines in the abbreviated jargon, not actual newspeak, but considered largely of newspeak words, which was used in the ministry for internal purposes. They ran: Times, 17/3/84, BB, speech. Mao reported Africa rectify. Time, 19/12/83, forecasts 3 YP, 4th quarter, 83, misprints, verify current issue. Time, 14/2/84, mini plenty. Mao quoted chocolate rectify. Times, 3/12/83, reporting BB, day order, double plus ungood, refs unpersons, rewrite full wise, upsub, anti-filling. With a faint feeling of satisfaction, Winston laid the 4th message aside. It was an indication, and it was an intricate and responsible job, and had better be dealt with last. The other 3 were routine matters, though the second would be probably mean some tedious wading through lists of figures. Winston dialed back numbers on the telescreen and called for the appropriate issues of the Times, which slid out of the pneumatic tube. After only a few minutes' delay, the messages he had received referred to articles or news items which, for one reason or another, it was necessary to alter, or, as the official phrase had it, to rectify. For example, it appeared from the Times of the 17th of March that Big Brother, in his speech of the previous day, had predicted that the South Indian front would remain quiet, but that a Eurasian offensive would shortly be launched in North Africa. As it happened, the Eurasian High Command had launched its offensive in South India and left North Africa alone. It was therefore necessary to rewrite a paragraph of Big Brother's speech in such a way to make him predict the thing that had actually happened. Or again, the Times of the 19th of December had published the official forecast of the output of various classes of consumption. Classes of consumption goods in the fourth quarter of 1983, which was also the sixth quarter of the ninth three-year plan. Today's issue contained a statement of the actual output from which it appeared that the forecasts were in every instance grossly wrong. Winston's job was to rectify the original figures by making them agree with the later ones. As for the third message, it referred to the very simple error which could be set right in a couple of minutes. As short a time ago as February, the Ministry of Plenty had issued promises, a categorical pledge, were the official words, that there would be no reduction of the chocolate ration during 1984. Actually, as Winston was aware, the chocolate ration was to be reduced from 30 grams to 20 at the end of the present week. All that was needed was to substitute for the original promise a warning that it would probably be necessary to reduce the ration at some time in April. As soon as Winston dealt with each of the messages, he clipped his speak written corrections to the appropriate copy of the Times and pushed them into the pneumatic tube. Then, with a movement which was as nearly as possibly unconscious, he crumpled up the original messages and any notes that he himself had made and dropped them into the memory hole to be devoured by the flames. This next paragraph looks pretty long. We are going to end it here for now. If you like this, let me put this in like this. Okay. We've been reading George Orwell's 1984. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you want to support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.